The emergency alarm at Ramstein Air Base pierced the morning air as Jessica Kowalski dropped her wrench and looked up from the engine she was servicing. What happened in the next 30 minutes would expose a secret she'd been hiding for 12 years and prove that some skills are impossible to forget, even when you've spent over a decade pretending they never existed. Jessica Kowalski was exactly where she wanted to be, invisible. For the past 4 years, she'd worked as a civilian aircraft mechanic at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, maintaining the fleet of transport planes that kept the base operational. With her black hair always pulled back in a practical ponytail and her small frame often hidden under oversized coveralls, she blended seamlessly into the background of the massive military installation. Her co-workers knew her as the quiet Polish girl who'd immigrated to Germany as a teenager, the one who had an almost supernatural ability to diagnose engine problems, but never spoke about her past. She arrived early, worked efficiently, and left promptly at the end of her shift. No one questioned why someone so young had such an intuitive understanding of aircraft systems, or why she sometimes corrected senior mechanics with an authority that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than technical manuals. Jessica preferred it that way. She'd spent the last 12 years carefully constructing this unremarkable identity, learning to suppress the instincts that had once made her exceptional. When she watched the F-22 Raptors take off from the base's main runway, she forced herself to look away, to ignore the familiar ache in her chest that reminded her of who she used to be. This morning had started like any other. She was performing routine maintenance on a C-130 transport plane, checking hydraulic systems with the methodical precision that made her supervisors trust her with the base's most critical aircraft. The work was satisfying in its simplicity, predictable problems with predictable solutions. Nothing like the split-second decisions and impossible maneuvers that had once defined her life. Her supervisor, Master Sergeant Frank Mueller, approached her workstation carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone dealing with an unexpected crisis. At 45, Mueller was a career military man who'd seen enough emergencies to know when something was seriously wrong. "Kowalski," he called, his German accent thick with stress. "We need to talk." Jessica looked up from the engine compartment, wiping grease from her hands with a rag that had seen better days. "What's wrong?" "We've got a situation developing," Mueller said, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. NATO exercise Crimson Thunder was supposed to be a routine training mission. 4 F-22s, standard air superiority demonstration. For visiting dignitaries. Jessica nodded, not understanding why this concerned her. The F-22 pilots trained regularly, and their exercises rarely involved the maintenance crew beyond pre-flight checks. 20 minutes ago, we lost contact with Raptor 3, Mueller continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Emergency. Transponder indicates the pilot ejected over the Black Forest. Search and rescue is en route, but there's a problem." The familiar knot of anxiety that Jessica had learned to ignore began forming in her stomach. What kind of problem? The exercise isn't just a demonstration. There's a high-value intelligence package aboard Raptor 3 encrypted data that NATO's been tracking for months. If that aircraft falls into the wrong hands... Mueller didn't finish the sentence, but Jessica understood the implications. "So, what does that have to do with me?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would change everything. Mueller's expression grew grim. "The remaining 3 F-22s need to locate and secure that aircraft before anyone else does. But here's the thing. The pilot who ejected was supposed to be carrying the mission's navigation codes. Without those codes, the search area covers over 200 square kilometers of dense forest." Jessica felt her carefully constructed world beginning to shift beneath her feet. "I still don't understand what this has to do with aircraft maintenance." "It doesn't," Mueller said quietly. "But it has everything to do with the fact that we need someone who can fly an F-22 at a moment's notice. And our backup pilot called in sick this morning with food poisoning. The words hit Jessica like a physical blow. She took a step backward, shaking her head instinctively. "I'm a mechanic, Sergeant. I don't fly planes." Mueller studied her face with the intensity of someone who'd spent decades reading people. "Funny thing, Kowalski, I've been watching you for 4 years. The way you understand these aircraft, the way you talk about flight dynamics, the way you instinctively know how every system works together. Most mechanics learn planes from the ground up. You understand them like someone who's lived inside them." Jessica's hands began to tremble slightly, a reaction she hoped Mueller wouldn't notice. "I just read a lot of technical manuals." "Maybe," Mueller said, pulling out a tablet and showing her a series of official documents. "Or maybe it has something to do with the fact that when I ran a deeper background check on you this morning, I found some very interesting gaps in your documentation." The tablet screen showed Jessica's employment records, visa applications, and educational certificates. Everything looked normal, exactly as she'd carefully arranged years ago. But Mueller scrolled to a section she'd never seen before, a series of classified database queries that had been flagged for manual review. "According to this," Mueller said quietly, "Jessica Kowalski didn't exist before age 13. No birth records, no early education documentation, no family registration in any Polish database. It's like you materialized out of thin air as a teenager." Jessica's mouth went dry. She'd been so careful, so thorough in creating her civilian identity, but she'd never considered that someone might look deeper than the standard background checks required for base employment. "People lose documents," she said weakly. "Refugees, displaced families, ... "That's what I thought too," Mueller interrupted, "until I started wondering why a refugee with no formal aviation training could diagnose engine problems that stump mechanics with 20 years of experience." The emergency alarm that had started. The morning's crisis chose that moment to sound again. 3 short blasts that indicated an immediate tactical response was required. Mueller's radio crackled to life with urgent communications from the control tower. "Sergeant Mueller, we need that backup pilot airborne in 15 minutes. The weather window for search and rescue is closing fast." Mueller looked at Jessica with an expression that mixed suspicion, desperation, and something that might have been understanding. "Kowalski, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I need you to be straight with me. Have you ever flown a fighter aircraft?" Jessica stared at him, feeling the weight of 12 years of carefully maintained lies pressing down on her shoulders. In the distance, she could hear the sound of F-22 engines spinning up for emergency launch, the sound that had once been the soundtrack to her life, the sound she'd been running from ever since. The next 15 minutes would determine whether Jessica's carefully constructed anonymity could survive, or whether the crisis unfolding around them would force her to confront the identity she'd been hiding for over a decade. Mueller's radio crackled again, this time with the voice of Colonel Robert Anderson, the base commander. "Mueller, what's the status on that backup pilot? We've got a narrow search window and 3 F-22s sitting on the tarmac waiting for their 4th. Mueller keyed his radio while maintaining eye contact with Jessica. "Colonel, we're still working on the situation." "Work faster, Sergeant. Every minute we delay increases the risk of that intelligence falling into hostile hands." As Mueller spoke with his superiors, Jessica found herself studying the F-22s visible through the hangar's open bay doors. Even from a distance, she could see the pilots going through their pre-flight checks, their movements crisp and purposeful. It had been 12 years since she'd sat in a cockpit like that. 12 years since she'd felt the incredible power of a fighter jet responding to her commands. She forced herself to look away, focusing instead on the C-130 she'd been working on, safe, predictable, grounded. Everything she'd tried to become. Kowalski, Mueller said, ending his radio conversation. I'm going to tell you what I think is happening here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Jessica remained silent, her hands unconsciously gripping the wrench she'd been holding when the crisis began. I think you're not who you say you are, Mueller continued. I think those gaps in your documentation aren't accidents or bureaucratic oversights. I think you've been deliberately hiding from something or someone for a very long time. The accuracy of his assessment made Jessica's chest tighten. She'd underestimated the senior NCO's investigative instincts. More importantly, Mueller went on, I think you have skills that you're not telling us about. Skills that might be exactly what we need right now. Before Jessica could respond, Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, the squadron commander for the F-22 unit, strode into the hangar. At 40, Harrison had the bearing of someone who'd spent his career in high-stakes situations, and the tension radiating from him was palpable. Mueller, please tell me you found us a pilot, Harrison said without preamble. We've just received intelligence that unfriendly elements may be moving toward the crash site. We need to be airborne in 10 minutes, or this whole operation becomes infinitely more complicated. Mueller glanced at Jessica, then back at Harrison. Sir, I may have identified a possible solution, but it's unconventional. Harrison followed Mueller's gaze to Jessica, taking in her mechanic's coveralls and grease-stained hands. Please tell me you're not suggesting what I think you're suggesting. Colonel, Mueller said carefully, what if I told you that Miss Kowalski here might have more aviation experience than her current job title indicates? Jessica felt the conversation spiraling beyond her control. Sergeant Mueller, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Have you ever been in the cockpit of a fighter aircraft? Harrison interrupted, his tone sharp with urgency. The direct question hung in the air between them. Jessica could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 12 years of hidden truth pressing against her carefully constructed walls. She could lie, maintain her cover, and watch as the situation deteriorated around them. Or she could admit to knowledge that would expose everything she'd been hiding. Yes, she said quietly, the word escaping before she could stop it. Harrison's expression shifted immediately. What kind of aircraft? Jessica closed her eyes, feeling the last of her defenses crumbling. F-16s, F-18s, F-22s. How many hours? Enough. Harrison exchanged a look with Mueller that spoke volumes about the desperation of their situation. Miss Kowalski, I'm going to ask you a series of technical questions. Your answers will determine whether we're having a very different conversation. In the next 5 minutes. Over the following minutes, Harrison rapid-fired questions about F-22 flight systems, weapons configurations, and emergency procedures. Despite herself, Jessica found herself answering with an authority and precision that made both men stare at her in amazement. Thrust vectoring engagement protocols in a low-altitude search pattern? Reduce throttle to 75%. Engage vectoring at 15-degree intervals. Maintain 200-foot altitude separation from terrain using ground-following radar. Emergency communication backup if primary systems fail. Switch to UHF guard frequency 2-4-3-point-0. Use emergency transponder code 7-7-0-0. Maintain heading toward designated recovery coordinates. Weapons safety protocols during a reconnaissance mission. Master arm switch remains in safe position unless direct threat is identified. Weapon selector in train mode. Confirm IFF-friendly codes before any engagement authorization. With each answer, Jessica felt pieces of her old identity reasserting themselves. The knowledge was still there, intact after 12 years of forced dormancy. The muscle memory, the instincts, the split-second decision-making processes that had once defined her, all of it waiting just beneath the surface of her carefully maintained civilian facade. Harrison's radio crackled with an update from the control tower. Colonel Harrison, we've detected unidentified vehicles moving toward the crash site. Estimated arrival time, 35 minutes. We need those Raptors airborne immediately. Harrison looked at Jessica with an expression that mixed professional assessment with something approaching desperation. Miss Kowalski, I'm going to make this very simple. We have 3 F-22s that need a 4th pilot for a time-critical mission. Our backup is incapacitated, and you've just demonstrated knowledge that suggests significant fighter aircraft experience. Jessica shook her head, panic rising in her throat. Colonel, you don't understand. I can't. Can't what? Can't fly? Because everything you've just told me suggests otherwise. It's complicated, Jessica said weakly. Then uncomplicated, Harrison snapped. Because in 30 minutes, classified NATO intelligence may fall into hostile hands, and you might be the only person on this base who can prevent that from happening. The weight of the moment settled over them like a physical presence. Jessica looked around the hangar at the aircraft she'd been maintaining, at the 2 military officers who were asking her to step back into a world she'd spent 12 years trying to escape. Her hands were no longer trembling. For the first time in years, she felt the familiar calm that had once made her exceptional settling over her like a second skin. The instinct she'd suppressed, the training she'd tried to forget, the identity she'd buried, all of it was still there, waiting. If I do this, she said quietly, everything changes. Harrison nodded grimly. Everything's already changed, Miss Kowalski. The question is whether you're going to help us change it back. Jessica looked through the hangar doors at the F-22s. Waiting on the tarmac, their engines humming with barely contained power. After 12 years of hiding, of being small and invisible and safe, the aircraft seemed to be calling her home. I'll need 5 minutes to review the mission parameters, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. Harrison's relief was visible. You'll have them. Mueller, get her whatever she needs. As the 2 officers hurried away to coordinate the emergency mission, Jessica stood alone in the hangar, staring at her reflection in the polished surface of the Ki-130. The woman looking back at her was still small, still dark-haired, still wearing mechanic's coveralls. But something fundamental had shifted in her eyes, a recognition of who she really was beneath the carefully constructed facade. For 12 years, she'd been Jessica Kowalski, the quiet civilian mechanic who blended into the background. In 5 minutes, she'd have to remember how to be someone else entirely. Someone who'd been dead to the world for over a decade, but who had never really gone away. The hardest part wouldn't be flying the F-22. The hardest part would be accepting that her life as an invisible mechanic was over, and that the person she'd been hiding was about to be exposed to the world. The flight suit felt familiar against Jessica's skin as she walked toward the F-22, muscle memory flooding back despite 12 years of suppression. Lieutenant Rachel Thompson, the mission leader, watched her approach with professional curiosity. You must be our emergency backup, Thompson said, extending her hand. I'm Lightning One for this mission. You'll be Shadow 4. As they shook hands, Jessica unconsciously fell into the confident posture of an experienced pilot. Thank you for trusting someone you don't know with this. Colonel Harrison vouched for you, Thompson replied, studying Jessica's demeanor. Though I have to ask, when was the last time you were in an F-22? It's been a while, Jessica said carefully, her eyes automatically scanning the aircraft's configuration. Without thinking, she began cataloging details that only an experienced pilot would notice. Thrust vectoring nozzle positions, stealth coating condition, weapons bay status. Thompson followed her gaze. Interesting. You're looking at that aircraft like a pilot, not maintenance crew. Jessica caught herself, realizing she'd been performing the kind of pre-flight visual inspection that was second nature to fighter pilots. I work on these systems daily. Hard not to notice things. Right, Thompson said, though her tone carried skepticism. What's your assessment of the configuration? The question should have been a trap for someone with supposedly limited aviation knowledge. Instead, Jessica responded instinctively. Clean stealth configuration. No external stores. Internal weapons bays loaded with AIM-120 X-rays for defensive engagement only. Fuel load prioritized for extended range rather than combat payload. Thompson stopped walking and stared. That's classified weapons configuration information. How does a civilian contractor know about internal bay loadouts? Heat rose in Jessica's cheeks as she realized her mistake. Technical manuals, she said. Weekly, I read extensively about the systems I maintain. Maintenance personnel don't have access to classified weapons data, Thompson replied sharply. Who exactly are you? Before Jessica could answer, they reached the mission briefing room where Colonel Harrison waited with tactical displays and satellite imagery of the crash site. Major David Williams, the third pilot, looked up from his charts. Shadow 4. Harrison began without preamble. Raptor 3 went down in grid square 487 to 229. Pilot ejected safely, but is injured. The aircraft carries time-sensitive NATO intelligence that cannot be compromised. Jessica studied the topographical display with an intensity that surprised everyone present. Her eyes tracked terrain features, elevation changes, and potential approach routes with the precision of someone experienced in tactical mission planning. Timeline for hostile contact? She asked, her voice carrying unexpected authority. Approximately 25 minutes, Harrison replied. Extraction options for the downed pilot? Jessica continued, her questions becoming increasingly tactical. Williams watched this exchange with growing amazement. Those are mission commander-level questions from someone supposedly pulled from maintenance. Jessica realized she was slipping back into old patterns, thinking like the tactical pilot she'd once been rather than the civilian she was supposed to be. I just want to understand the situation completely. Really? Thompson interjected. Because you're processing this briefing like someone with extensive combat mission experience. When Harrison displayed radar coverage maps and mentioned electronic warfare considerations, Jessica unconsciously nodded and began forming tactical recommendations before catching herself. You were about to say something about electronic countermeasures. Williams prompted. Nothing important, Jessica said quickly, but the damage was accumulating. Thompson's expression had shifted from professional acceptance to active suspicion. Shadow 4, Thompson said firmly. I need a straight answer. What's your actual flight background? The room fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment. Jessica felt 3 experienced pilots studying her, trying to reconcile her supposed maintenance background with the obvious tactical expertise she was displaying. It's complicated, she admitted finally. Uncomplicated, Harrison demanded. Because you're demonstrating knowledge that civilian contractors don't possess. Sir, Williams added, I've been flying VF-22s for 8 years. I've never met maintenance personnel who understand tactical briefings like she does. Jessica looked around the room at faces that demanded explanations she wasn't prepared to give. She could continue lying and hope they'd accept the inconsistencies, or acknowledge that her carefully constructed identity was crumbling under instincts she couldn't suppress. The mission timer chimed. 22 minutes until hostile contact. We'll resolve this later, Harrison said grimly. Right now, we have a mission. But Shadow 4, when we return, you're going to explain exactly who you are and how you know what you clearly know. As they headed toward the aircraft, Thompson fell into step beside Jessica. Whoever you really are, you better be as good as you seem to think you are. Because if you get us killed because you're hiding something important, I'll personally make sure they court-martial whatever's left of you. Jessica nodded, understanding the weight of trust being placed in her despite the growing suspicions. As she approached Raptor 4, 12 years of carefully maintained anonymity felt like it was dissolving with each step toward the cockpit that would force her to remember exactly who she used to be. The pre-flight checklist was muscle memory. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, each switch and button exactly where her body expected it to be. The F-22 responded to her touch like an old friend welcoming her home. Shadow 4, radio check, came Thompson's voice through her headset. Shadow 4, 5 by 5, Jessica responded, the call sign feeling both foreign and familiar on her lips. Shadow 4, you sound like you've done this before, Williams observed over the comm. Jessica keyed her mic carefully. Just trying to do my job, Lightning 3. But as the engine spooled up and the aircraft came alive around her, Jessica felt the last of her resistance crumbling. The sensation of sitting in an F-22 cockpit was overwhelming, not just the physical reality of the controls and displays, but the emotional weight of returning to who she'd once been. For 12 years, she'd convinced herself that this part of her life was over. Now, surrounded by the familiar sounds and sensations of a fighter jet preparing for takeoff, she realized she'd never really left it behind. She'd just been hiding from it. Lightning flight, tower clears you for immediate departure, came the air traffic control voice. Winds calm, visibility unlimited. Good hunting. As her aircraft rolled toward the runway, Jessica felt 12 years of Jessica Kowalski, the quiet mechanic, falling away. In her place sat someone whose skills had never truly died. Someone who was about to prove that excellence doesn't disappear, it just waits for the right moment to resurface. The question was no longer whether she could complete this mission. The question was whether she was ready for what would happen when people discovered who she really was. Captain Marcus Webb had supervised air traffic control at Ramstein for 6 years, guiding thousands of aircraft through German airspace. He prided himself on reading pilots through their radio communications, distinguishing nervous rookies from confident veterans, identifying the subtle markers that separated good pilots from exceptional ones. When Shadow 4 first contacted the tower, something in her voice made Webb pause mid-clearance. Ramstein Tower, Shadow 4 requesting navigation systems verification before departure. The transmission was crisp, professional, carrying an underlying authority that seemed inconsistent with an emergency backup pilot pulled for maintenance duty. Webb keyed his response while signaling his assistant. Shadow 4, cleared for systems check. Rodriguez, pull up the flight roster. I want to know who's flying as Shadow 4. Through the tower windows, Webb observed the 4 F-22s. During pre-flight procedures, 3 aircraft showed standard preparation patterns, but Shadow 4 moved with different precision, no hesitation. No checklist consultation, movements flowing with practiced efficiency. Sir, Rodriguez called from his terminal. This is odd. Shadow 4 is listed as Jessica Kowalski, civilian maintenance contractor. No flight certification on file. No military aviation background documented anywhere. Webb frowned, keying his radio. Shadow 4, confirm flight certification status for tower records. A brief pause preceded the response. Tower, Shadow 4. Operating under emergency authorization from Colonel Harrison. The hesitation caught Webb's attention. Legitimate pilots answered certification questions immediately and confidently. This uncertainty suggested something irregular. Lightning 1, confirm Shadow 4's qualification status. Tower, Shadow 4 cleared for this mission by Squadron Command. Request immediate departure clearance due to time constraints. Webb noted Thompson's diplomatic evasion while checking the mission clock. 20 minutes until hostile contact. Whatever irregularities existed would need investigation later. All Raptor flights cleared for immediate departure. Runway 09. Winds calm, visibility unlimited. As the F-22s began takeoff sequence, Webb monitored their communications. What he heard challenged everything he understood about the pilots under his control. Lightning 1, Shadow 4 requesting defensive systems check during climb-out. Shadow 4 approved. Electronic threat assessment minimal. Radar signatures detected. No hostile electronic warfare emissions in operational area. Recommend maintaining EMCON Level 2 until reaching search grid. Webb blinked in surprise. EMCO on emission control procedures represented advanced tactical knowledge that civilian contractors shouldn't possess. He'd never heard backup pilots discuss electronic warfare with such casual expertise. Rodriguez, start recording all Shadow 4 communications. Full transcript required. The revelations continued as the flight approached the search area. Shadow 4 began providing tactical recommendations that suggested extensive combat experience. Lightning 1, recommend establishing high-low search pattern. 2 aircraft maintain altitude for overwatch, while 2 conduct low-level reconnaissance. High flight provides cover if we encounter hostiles. Thompson's response carried evident surprise. Shadow 4, that's excellent tactical planning. How did you never mind? Lightning flights, implement Shadow 4's recommendation. Webb was now monitoring every word from the mysterious fourth pilot. In 15 minutes, she demonstrated knowledge of electronic warfare, tactical formation flying, and threat assessment impressive even for experienced squadron pilots. The most revealing moment came when they reached the crash site coordinates. The downed pilot, Captain Rodriguez, was reporting hostile forces approaching. Lightning flight down bird. Visual contact with 12 individuals in military gear. Approaching from northeast. Estimate 15 minutes to my position. Down bird, Lightning 1. Can you reach more defensible terrain? Negative, Lightning 1. Dislocated shoulder. Terrain too rough. Shadow 4's voice cut through with precision that made Webb grab his transcription equipment. Down bird, Shadow 4. Provide GPS coordinates for clearing approximately 200 meters southeast of your position. Thermal imaging shows potential extraction site. Thermal imaging analysis wasn't standard backup pilot knowledge, especially for civilian contractors in emergency situations. Shadow 4 coordinates 4-8-point-7-2-3-4 north. 8-point-5-5-67 east. How did you identify that clearing? Thermal characteristics consistent with recent ground disturbance. Natural windfall area with minimal canopy cover. Sufficient space for helicopter extraction. If you can reach it. Rodriguez's amazement was audible. Shadow 4, that's exactly right. I can see the fallen trees. How did you determine that from altitude? Webb looked at Rodriguez, who was staring at the radio equipment. Sir, whoever Shadow 4 is, she's not using standard F-22 sensors for that analysis. Thermal interpretation requires advanced reconnaissance training. Shadow 4 continued demonstrating expertise that defied her supposed background. Lightning 1, recommend establishing defensive perimeter around extraction site. Lightning 2 and 3, conduct low passes to deter hostile approach. I'll maintain overwatch and coordinate with rescue helicopters. Shadow 4, Thompson, responded with audible confusion. That's perfect tactical coordination. Where exactly did you learn rescue operations? The pause was longer than necessary. When Shadow 4 responded, her voice carried different qualities, more guarded, more careful. Just thinking through the problem logically. Webb knew he was witnessing something extraordinary. 6 years of air traffic control had never produced a pilot demonstrating such sophisticated knowledge, while maintaining the calm professionalism. That suggested extensive combat experience. He reached for the secure line to Colonel Harrison's office. Whatever was happening with Shadow 4 transcended simple emergency substitution. Webb had the distinct impression he was listening to someone. Hiding expertise that fundamentally changed everything about this mission. As rescue operations unfolded, Webb documented every tactical suggestion, technical observation, and moment of battlefield awareness Shadow 4 displayed. By mission's end, he'd have evidence proving the woman flying as Shadow 4 was far more. Then she appeared, the question remaining, who was she really? And why was someone with elite combat pilot skills hiding as a maintenance contractor? 20 minutes later, the rescue operation concluded flawlessly. Captain Rodriguez was extracted safely, the hostile forces were deterred, and the classified intelligence remained secure. But as Webb watched the 4-22's approach for landing, he knew the real interrogation was just beginning. Shadow 4 had performed like a seasoned combat veteran, while supposedly being a civilian mechanic pulled into emergency service. The contradiction was impossible to ignore, and Webb's detailed transcripts would ensure that Colonel Harrison had all the evidence needed to demand answers. As the aircraft touched down, Webb made a final notation in his log. Shadow 4 demonstrated tactical expertise inconsistent with documented background. Recommend immediate investigation into pilot's actual qualifications and identity. The quiet mechanic who'd been hiding in plain sight was about to discover that exceptional performance under pressure had a way of exposing even the most carefully guarded secrets. The mission had ended successfully. Captain Rodriguez was extracted. Safely, the hostile forces were deterred, and the classified intelligence remained secure. But as the 4 F-22s touched down at Ramstein, Colonel Harrison knew the real interrogation was just beginning. In the post-flight debriefing room, Jessica sat across from Harrison, Thompson, and Williams, still wearing her borrowed flight suit. The adrenaline from the mission was fading, replaced by the cold reality that her 12 years of hiding were about to end. Shadow 4. Harrison began formally. Your performance today was exceptional, tactically sound, professionally executed, and demonstrated expertise that frankly defies explanation given your supposed background. Jessica remained silent, hands folded in her lap, trying to project calm while her mind raced through possible explanations that wouldn't expose everything. The problem, Thompson interjected, is that civilian maintenance contractors don't know how to interpret thermal imaging from F-22 sensors. They don't coordinate rescue operations or recommend tactical formations. Williams leaned forward. Ma'am, I've been flying combat missions for 12 years. What you did up there, the situational awareness, the tactical thinking, the absolute calm under pressure, that's not something you learn from technical manuals. Harrison opened a folder containing transcripts from Captain Webb's communications log. According to air traffic control, you demonstrated knowledge of MCON procedures, electronic warfare assessment, and reconnaissance interpretation that would be impressive for a squadron commander. I was just trying to help solve the problem, Jessica said quietly. By using skills that take years of specialized training to develop, Harrison challenged. Shadow 4, we're going to run a complete background investigation. Full security clearance review, biometric analysis, the works. If you're hiding something, we will find it. That's when Major Williams noticed something that changed everything. As Jessica reached up to remove her helmet, her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing the edge of what appeared to be a tattoo on her inner wrist. Wait, Williams said sharply. What's that marking on your wrist? Jessica's hand instinctively moved to cover the spot, but it was too late. Williams had seen enough to recognize military ink. Show us, Harrison commanded. With trembling hands, Jessica rolled back her sleeve, revealing a small but distinctive tattoo, wings wrapped around a lightning bolt with numbers beneath. TG0713. The room fell completely silent. Thompson's eyes widened in recognition while Williams leaned closer to examine the marking. "That's not just any military tattoo," Thompson whispered. "Those are naval aviator wings." Harrison's expression shifted from suspicion to something approaching shock. TG-0713. Top Gun, class of 2013. The 13th graduate of the 2007 program. "That's impossible," Williams said. "Top Gun graduates are tracked throughout their careers. There's no way someone with that level of training just disappears into civilian maintenance work." Jessica closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 12 years of secrets pressing down on her. The tattoo had been her one moment of pride, commemorating her graduation from the Navy's elite fighter weapons school. She'd never been able to bring herself to have it removed, even when every logical part of her brain said she should. "Ma'am," Harrison said, his voice carrying a different tone, now respect mixed with confusion. "If you graduated from Top Gun in 2013, you were 19 years old. The youngest graduate in the program's history." Thompson was already pulling up databases on her tablet, running a search for Top Gun Class 2013. "Here it is." She paused, reading. "Graduate number 13, Lieutenant Jennifer Kowalski, call sign Phoenix, graduated top of class with highest scores in tactical awareness and air-to-air combat." "Jennifer," Williams said quietly. "Jessica, that's your real name." Harrison leaned back in his chair, processing this revelation. According to this record, Lieutenant Kowalski was assigned to VF of 151 Vigilantes after Top Gun graduation. But there's a gap in the service record starting in 2014. What happened in 2014? Thompson asked directly. Jessica opened her eyes, meeting their gazes for the first time since the tattoo was discovered. "Training accident," she said quietly. "My wingman died because of my mistake. I couldn't fly after that." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Here was someone who had achieved the highest level of naval aviation training, only to have her career destroyed by tragedy. "You left the Navy?" Harrison asked gently. "I resigned my commission," Jessica confirmed. "Changed my name back to my maiden name, moved to Europe, tried to disappear from everything that reminded me of flying." Williams studied the database entry. According to this, Lieutenant Jennifer Kowalski was recommended for the Silver Star for actions during a training exercise that saved multiple aircraft. That doesn't sound like someone who made a fatal mistake. "The recommendation was filed after I'd already left," Jessica said bitterly. "Too little, too late." Thompson looked up from her research with an expression of amazement. "Jessica, do you realize what this means? You're not just any pilot. You're Phoenix, the youngest Top Gun graduate ever. The pilot who set tactical awareness records that still haven't been broken." "I'm a washout who got someone killed," Jessica replied. "You're a legend," Harrison corrected. "Phoenix was supposed to be the future of naval aviation. There were rumors that you'd been selected for experimental aircraft programs, classified missions that most pilots only dream about." Jessica shook her head. "That person doesn't exist anymore. She died in that cockpit 12 years ago, along with my wingman." The weight of her revelation hung in the air. They discovered not just a hidden pilot, but a legendary one whose disappearance had apparently left ripples throughout the naval aviation community. Harrison closed the folder, his expression mixing professional assessment with human compassion. "Phoenix, we need to make some calls. There are people who've been looking for you for over a decade." "Please don't," Jessica whispered. "I just want to go back to being invisible." "That's not possible anymore," Thompson said gently. "Not after today. You just proved that Phoenix never really died. She's been hiding in plain sight, and she's still the exceptional pilot she always was." Within 2 hours of discovering Jessica's true identity, Colonel Harrison's office had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Secure video conferences connected Ramstein with the Pentagon, Naval Air Station Fallon, and NATO headquarters in Brussels. The woman who had spent 12 years hiding as a maintenance contractor was about to face the military establishment she'd fled from. Admiral Rebecca Stone appeared on the main screen from Naval Air Station Fallon, her weathered face showing a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been relief. At 55, Stone had been the commanding officer of Top Gun when Jessica graduated in 2013. Colonel Harrison, Stone began without preamble. Please confirm that you have Lieutenant Jennifer Kowalski in custody. Not in custody. Admiral, Harrison corrected. Miss Kowalski is here voluntarily, though I suspect she'd prefer to be anywhere else right now. Jessica sat rigidly in her chair, still wearing the flight suit that had exposed her identity. Facing Admiral Stone through a video screen felt surreal after 12 years of believing she'd never see her former commanding officer again. Phoenix, Stone said, using Jessica's old call sign. Do you have any idea how many people have been looking for you? Admiral, I'm not Phoenix anymore, Jessica replied quietly. I haven't been for 12 years. Stone's expression softened slightly. Jennifer, you disappeared without explanation. One day you were the most promising pilot in naval aviation. The next, you'd resigned your commission and vanished. We've had investigators trying to track you down for over a decade. On another screen, Captain David Martinez from the Pentagon joined the conference. Jessica recognized him immediately. He'd been her flight instructor during advanced tactical training. Phoenix, Martinez said, his voice carrying both frustration and concern. We need to talk about Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh. The name hit Jessica like a physical blow. Sarah Walsh had been her wingman, her best friend, and the pilot who died in the training accident that ended Jessica's career. Sarah's dead because of me, Jessica said flatly. There's nothing to discuss. Actually, there is, Martinez replied, pulling up classified files. The accident investigation was completed 6 months after you resigned. The findings were classified, but you need to know what really happened that day. Admiral Stone leaned forward. Jennifer, the accident wasn't your fault. The investigation proved that Lieutenant Commander Walsh's aircraft suffered a catastrophic hydraulic failure that had nothing to do with your flying or tactical decisions. Jessica shook her head violently. That's impossible. I was flight leader. I made the call to push the envelope during the training exercise. If I hadn't been so aggressive, you would have lost 3 aircraft instead of 1, Martinez interrupted. Phoenix, your tactical decision to break formation and engage the simulated threat prevented a mid-air collision that would have killed 6 pilots instead of 1. The words seemed to hang in the air without meaning. Jessica had spent 12 years believing she was responsible for her wingman's death, building an entire identity around guilt and self-imposed exile. The hydraulic failure was a manufacturing defect, Stone continued, a flaw in the flight control system that had gone undetected for months. Sarah's aircraft was going to fail regardless of what mission profile you chose that day. Colonel Harrison watched Jessica's reaction carefully. Miss Kowalski, are you telling us that you've been hiding for 12 years based on guilt over an accident that wasn't your fault? I killed my best friend, Jessica whispered. No, came a new voice from the speakers. Captain Rodriguez, then pilot they'd rescued that morning, had joined the conference from the base medical facility. You saved lives today, just like you apparently saved lives 12 years ago. Rodriguez's image appeared on screen, his arm in a sling but his expression determined. Ma'am, I don't know the details of what happened in 2014, but I know what happened today. You coordinated a perfect rescue operation under hostile conditions. That's not the performance of someone who makes fatal mistakes. Admiral Stone opened another file. Phoenix, there's something else you need to know. The Silver Star recommendation that was filed after your resignation, it was approved. You've been awarded the Silver Star for heroism during the training exercise where Sarah died. Martinez continued. The citation reads, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action while serving as flight leader during a multi-aircraft training emergency. Lieutenant Kowalski's tactical decision-making and exceptional flying skills prevented multiple aircraft losses and saved the lives of 5 fellow aviators. Jessica stared at the screens in disbelief. You're saying I received a medal for the day my wingman died? You received a medal for the day you saved 5 other pilots from dying along with her, Stone corrected. Jennifer, the tactical analysis of that day has been used in training scenarios for 12 years. Your decision-making under pressure is literally being taught to the next generation of naval aviators. The revelation was too much to process. 12 years of guilt. 12 years of self-imposed exile. 12 years of believing she was a failure, all based on incomplete information and survivor's guilt. Phoenix, Stone said gently, we've never stopped looking for you because the Navy needs pilots like you. The kind of pilot who can coordinate a perfect rescue mission while flying an aircraft she supposedly hasn't touched in over a decade. Thompson, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. Admiral, today's mission performance suggests that Lieutenant Kowalski's skills haven't deteriorated despite 12 years away from fighter aircraft. Her tactical awareness and flight instincts were exceptional. That doesn't surprise me, Stone replied. Phoenix was always exceptional. The question is whether she's ready to stop running from who she is. Jessica looked around the room at faces both familiar and new, all watching her with expressions that mixed professional assessment with human compassion. For 12 years, she believed she was hiding from justice. Instead, she'd been hiding from vindication. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now, Admiral Stone said, we give you a choice. You can return to your maintenance job, and we'll respect your decision to remain civilian. Or you can consider that maybe it's time for Phoenix to come home. The weight of 12 years of hiding pressed against the possibility of redemption. For the first time since 2014, Jessica began to consider that maybe she'd been wrong about everything. The secure conference room at Ramstein had become a crossroads between Jessica's hidden past and an uncertain future. Admiral Stone's offer hung in the air like a challenge she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. Admiral, Jessica said slowly, you don't understand what the last 12 years have been like. I've spent every day believing I killed my best friend. I've built an entire life around the certainty that I was a failure who didn't deserve to fly. Captain Martinez leaned forward on the screen. Phoenix, we have the complete accident investigation files. Would you like to see exactly what happened that day? Against every instinct telling her to refuse, Jessica nodded. Martinez began displaying classified documents that she'd never seen technical analyses, flight data recordings, and witness statements from the training exercise that had destroyed her world. The exercise was a complex multi-threat scenario. Martinez explained. 6 F-18s engaging simulated enemy aircraft while protecting a high-value target. You were flight leader. Sarah was your wingman. Jessica closed her eyes, remembering. I called for an aggressive intercept when the opposing force tried to flank our formation. Sarah followed my lead. According to flight data, that decision was tactically perfect, Martinez continued. The opposing force was attempting a coordinated attack that would have overwhelmed your defensive positions. Your intercept call prevented them from achieving firing solutions on 4 different aircraft. Admiral Stone took over the narrative. The hydraulic failure occurred 7 minutes after your intercept maneuver. Sarah's aircraft lost primary flight controls while in a high-G turn. The failure was instantaneous and unrecoverable. But if I hadn't called for the aggressive maneuver, Jessica began. The failure would have happened anyway, Stone interrupted. The manufacturing defect created a stress fracture in the hydraulic line that was already 87% complete before the exercise even began. Any significant maneuvering would have triggered the failure. Carl Harrison, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. Miss Kowalski, what they're telling you is that your wingman was flying a ticking time bomb. Your tactical decisions didn't cause the accident. They delayed it long enough for you to save 5 other pilots. Martinez displayed another document. Phoenix, after Sarah's aircraft failed, you coordinated a textbook emergency response. You guided the remaining aircraft clear of the debris field, established a safe recovery pattern, and personally escorted a damaged F-18 back to base when its pilot became disoriented. Lieutenant Rodriguez, the pilot you escorted, went on to become one of our most decorated aviators, Stone added. He credits your leadership that day with saving his life and career. The information was overwhelming. 12 years of guilt and self-recrimination were crumbling under the weight of facts she'd never known existed. Why wasn't I told this at the time? Jessica asked. Because you disappeared before the investigation concluded, Stone replied. We tried to contact you, but you'd already resigned your commission and vanished. By the time we had answers, Phoenix had become a ghost. Thompson, who had been reviewing the technical data, looked up with amazement. Jessica, these flight recordings show decision-making under pressure that's being used to train current Top Gun students. You're literally a case study in tactical excellence. There's more, Martinez said, opening another file. After your disappearance, we analyzed your entire flight training record. Your tactical innovation scores were off the charts. You weren't just an exceptional pilot, you were developing new combat techniques that we're still implementing today. Admiral Stone's expression grew serious. Phoenix, the reason we've been looking for you isn't just because of what you accomplished in the past. It's because of what you could accomplish in the future. The Navy is developing next-generation fighter programs that need pilots with your specific combination of tactical innovation and flight instincts. I'm 25 years old, Jessica said quietly. I've been out of fighters for 12 years. I'm not the pilot I was. Today suggests otherwise, Colonel Harrison interjected. You just executed a perfect combat rescue mission in an aircraft you supposedly hadn't flown in over a decade. Your tactical awareness was exceptional. Captain Rodriguez, still connected from the medical facility, spoke up. Ma'am, with respect, you saved my life today using skills that most pilots spend decades trying to develop. If that's what you're capable of after 12 years away from fighters, I can't imagine what you could do with proper training and support. But Jessica was starting to piece together something that didn't make sense. Admiral, if the investigation cleared me, why did everyone at the squadron act like I was responsible? Why did my commanding officer approve my resignation so quickly? Stone's expression darkened. What do you mean, Jennifer? Lieutenant Commander Blake Morrison was the most vocal, Jessica recalled painfully. He said I was reckless, that Sarah died because I was trying to show off my Top Gun training. Captain Stevens barely spoke to me after the accident. When I submitted my resignation, he approved it immediately. Martinez was already pulling up personnel files. Morrison. Here he is. He was Sarah's previous wingman before she was reassigned to fly with you. Morrison filed a formal complaint against you 3 weeks before the accident, Stone added, reading from classified documents. He alleged that you were receiving preferential treatment because of your Top Gun credentials. The pieces of a 12-year-old puzzle were starting to come together. Jessica had been so consumed by grief and guilt that she'd never questioned the hostile environment that had driven her to resign. Morrison's fitness reports showed declining performance ratings starting 6 months before the accident. Martinez continued, He was being considered for removal from flight status. Harrison leaned back in his chair. So Morrison had professional jealousy, declining performance, and was facing potential removal from flight status. Then a tragic accident gave him the opportunity to blame someone else for the squadron's problems. That's speculation, Jessica said, though doubt was creeping into her voice. Is it? Stone asked, pulling up another document. Because here's Captain Stevens' private correspondence with his superiors. He writes, "The Morrison situation has created a toxic environment in the squadron. His targeting of Lieutenant Kowalski appears to be motivated by jealousy rather than legitimate safety concerns." Williams shook his head in disgust. "Phoenix, you were set up. Morrison used Sarah's death as an opportunity to destroy your career and cover his own failures." "But Stevens approved my resignation immediately," Jessica protested. "Look at the date on his correspondence," Stone said. "Stevens wrote this. Letter recommending Morrison's removal from flight status on March 16th, one day after you resigned. He was planning to address the toxic environment, but you were already gone." The revelation hit Jessica like a physical blow. She'd fled the Navy not because of her own failures, but because she'd been systematically undermined by a jealous pilot who'd seen her success as a threat to his career. "Morrison was relieved of flight duty 6 months after you left," Harrison added, "officially for performance deficiencies, but the timing suggests Stevens finally addressed the problems you never stayed to see resolved." Admiral Stone's voice carried anger now. "Phoenix, you spent 12 years believing you were guilty of something that wasn't your fault, driven away by someone who was jealous of your abilities. The question now is what you're going to do with this information." Jessica stared at the documents scattered across the conference table, evidence that her entire understanding of the past 12 years had been built on lies and manipulation. "Morrison destroyed my career based on jealousy," she said quietly. "He let me believe I was responsible for Sarah's death when he knew the investigation would prove otherwise." "That's exactly what happened," Williams confirmed. "And while you've been hiding as a maintenance contractor, he's been promoted to commander and is currently serving as an instructor at the Navy's test pilot school." The injustice was overwhelming. While Jessica had spent 12 years in self-imposed exile, the man who'd driven her away had advanced his career by standing on the wreckage of hers. "What do I do now?" she asked. Harrison stood up, his expression determined. "Now, Phoenix, you stop letting Blake Morrison define who you are. You take back the career he stole from you." For the first time in 12 years, anger was replacing guilt in Jessica's heart. And with that anger came a determination she hadn't felt since she was 19 years old and conquering the skies above Nevada. 3 days after the investigation revealed Blake Morrison's betrayal, Jessica sat in the base chapel at Ramstein, a place she hadn't visited since arriving in Germany. The quiet space felt appropriate for confronting the deepest truths about why she'd really been hiding for 12 years. Colonel Harrison found her there, carrying a folder that would determine her future. "Phoenix," he said gently, sitting beside her in the wooden pew. "Admiral Stone has been in contact with the Pentagon. They want you back." Jessica stared at the stained glass windows, morning light filtering through in patterns of blue and gold. "What if I'm not ready? What if 12 years of hiding has broken something essential? Yesterday, you saved a man's life and completed a perfect tactical mission in an aircraft you supposedly hadn't touched in over a decade." Harrison replied, "If that's what broken looks like, the Navy could use more broken pilots." He opened the folder, revealing official orders with the seal of the Department of the Navy. "These are transfer orders to Naval Air Station Fallon. You'd be reinstated at the rank of commander, the rank you would have held if you'd never left. Your assignment would be to lead the Phoenix Initiative." "What's the Phoenix Initiative?" Harrison smiled. "A program they created after you disappeared. They've been identifying and training pilots with your combination of tactical innovation and flight instincts. 12 pilots over the past decade who show similar potential to what you demonstrated as a teenager. The irony wasn't lost on her. While she'd been hiding from her identity as Phoenix, the Navy had been building an entire program around the legend she'd tried to escape. They wanted you to come home, not just to fly again, but to mentor the next generation of tactical innovators. Harrison continued to teach them what you learned through instinct. Jessica thought about the previous night when she'd called her adoptive sister Emma in Poland. Emma's words echoed in her mind. People don't lose that kind of talent, Jennifer. They just convince themselves it's gone because it's safer than risking failure. There's something else, Harrison said, his voice growing serious. Morrison is still active duty. He's been promoted twice since you left, and he's currently an instructor at the test pilot school. Your returning to service would mean potentially working in the same community again. The mention of Morrison sent a familiar spike of anxiety through Jessica's chest, but this time it was accompanied by something new resolve. 12 years ago, I let him drive me away because I believed his lies about my capabilities, she said slowly. I convinced myself that leaving was protecting other pilots from my failures. But the real failure was letting one man's jealousy destroy something I'd worked my entire life to achieve. Harrison nodded. Admiral Stone mentioned that there might be an opportunity for you to address Morrison's conduct officially. His pattern of undermining promising pilots apparently didn't end with you. Jessica stood up, decision crystallizing in her mind. Colonel, what would happen if I said yes? You'd report to Fallon in 2 weeks. Commander's insignia, command of the Phoenix Initiative, and access to classified programs that would let you help design the future of air combat. She walked to the chapel window, looking out at the flight line where Funny Twos were conducting afternoon training sorties. For 12 years, watching those aircraft had filled her with pain and regret. Now they looked like possibilities, waiting to be explored. The pilots in the Phoenix Initiative, she asked, are they good? They're exceptional, but they've been developing in isolation, trying to recreate innovations you pioneered naturally. They need someone who can teach them not just the techniques, but the mindset that creates tactical breakthroughs. Jessica thought about Lieutenant Thompson, who demonstrated such professional skill during the rescue mission. About Captain Rodriguez, whose gratitude had been so genuine. About all the pilots who might benefit from training that could save their lives in combat. There's one condition, she said finally. Name it. I want a full review of Morrison's conduct toward junior pilots. If he's been doing to others what he did to me, it needs to stop. Harrison's smile was grim. Admiral Stone anticipated that request. The investigation is already underway. Jessica turned back to face him, and for the first time in 12 years, she felt like herself again, not the broken pilot who'd fled in guilt, not the invisible mechanic who'd been hiding, but the tactical innovator who'd once set records at Top Gun. Colonel, Phoenix is ready to come home. 6 months later, Commander Jennifer Phoenix Kowalski stood on the flight line at Naval Air Station Fallon, watching her Phoenix Initiative pilots prepare for their graduation exercise. The Nevada sun beat down on the tarmac just as it had when she was 19, but everything else had changed. Phoenix Control, Lightning Flight ready for final assessment, came Lieutenant Commander Rachel Thompson's voice through her headset. Thompson had requested transfer to the program after their mission at Ramstein, saying she wanted to learn from the pilot who'd impressed her so much during the rescue operation. Lightning Flight, Phoenix Control, Jessica responded, using her new call sign as commander of the program. Today's scenario will test everything you've learned about adaptive tactical thinking. Remember, there are no perfect solutions, only solutions that work. Through her binoculars, Jessica watched 12 F-22 Raptors taxi toward the runway. Each aircraft represented months of intensive training that had transformed promising pilots into tactical innovators capable of redefining air combat doctrine. The exercise was a complex multi-threat scenario that had been deemed impossible by conventional training standards. Jessica had designed it specifically to force her pilots beyond traditional thinking, the same approach that had been used to challenge her over a decade ago. Phoenix Control, Lightning 1 requesting permission to brief tactical modification. Thompson's voice carried the confidence of a pilot who'd learned to trust her instincts. Lightning 1, approved. What's your assessment? Phoenix Control, recommend splitting formation into 3 elements instead of 2. Use vertical separation to create overlapping fields of fire while maintaining stealth positioning. Jessica smiled, recognizing the innovation. Thompson had just developed a tactical solution that improved on standard doctrine, exactly what the Phoenix Initiative was designed to achieve. As the exercise unfolded, Jessica found herself watching the next generation of tactical innovators discover their own capabilities. Each pilot was pushing beyond what they thought possible, developing solutions that would eventually become standard throughout naval aviation. Admiral Stone's voice came over the radio from the observation tower. Phoenix, the Joint Chiefs, have reviewed the Phoenix Initiative's first-year results. They're impressed enough to expand the program to include Air Force and Marine aviators. The implications were staggering. What had started as her personal redemption was evolving into a transformation of how the military developed tactical excellence. But the most satisfying moment came near the end of the exercise, when Jessica received a secure communication from the Pentagon. Phoenix, this is Admiral Stone. I thought you'd want to know Commander Morrison's investigation concluded yesterday. He's been relieved of duty and will face a court-martial for systematic harassment of junior officers. 6 pilots have come forward with stories similar to yours. Jessica closed her eyes, feeling a weight she'd carried for 12 years finally lifting from her shoulders. Morrison would never again be able to destroy a promising pilot's career through jealousy and manipulation. Phoenix Control Lightning flight mission complete. Thompson's voice brought her back to the present. All objectives achieved through adaptive tactical employment. Lightning flight Phoenix Control. Outstanding execution. Return to base. As the aircraft landed, Jessica reflected on the journey that had brought her from a maintenance hangar in Germany to commanding the Navy's most advanced tactical training program. 12 years of hiding had ended with the acceptance of responsibilities she'd always been meant to carry. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Emma in Poland. Saw the news article about the Phoenix Initiative. Dad would be proud. You're finally using your gifts the way he always said you should. Jessica looked up at the Nevada sky, remembering her father's words about gifts coming with responsibilities. For 12 years, she'd hidden her talents because she was afraid of failure. Now she understood that her greatest contribution wasn't individual achievement, it was empowering others to achieve greatness themselves. The quiet maintenance worker who'd hidden at Ramstein Air Base no longer existed. In her place stood Commander Phoenix, ready to lead the next evolution of air combat into whatever challenges awaited. Some legends hide in plain sight until the world forces them to remember who they really are. Phoenix had finally stopped hiding, and the sky was calling her home. As the sun set over the Nevada desert, Jessica walked toward her own FOT 22, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new innovations, and new opportunities to prove that excellence doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right moment to take flight again. The girl who'd been afraid of her own capabilities had become the woman who taught others to embrace theirs. And in that transformation, she'd found not just redemption, but purpose. Phoenix was home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.